What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the Season 5 Reloaded close range meta. I'm going to go through what MetaGen spits out, give my own personal thoughts about that, and then give you guys the best builds that I can come up with, as well as the tunings for all of those. And as always, this video was available 2 days earlier to True Game Data Premium subscribers. It's just on the website over here, YouTube Early Releases. You can get email notifications for those videos when I post them there, and then they go live publicly on YouTube 2 days later. On top of getting access to the videos 2 days earlier, you also get access to MetaGen, you get access to the best stat tool, shots to kill calculator, all the advanced tools on TGD, so I just wanted to remind you guys of that. But let's not waste any more time, let's jump into it and start talking about the close range meta. Alright, so we've got the default run here on MetaGen. This is just quads with default settings, so this is going to be 5 attachments. You can run it so it forces an empty attachment slot, and that's for you to use an optic, but a lot of people use the iron sights, things like that. So I like to run it with 5 attachments just so you guys can see that. You can see right away, Lachmann Shroud comes out on top. Obviously, we will talk about that. Lachmann Shroud it has the best time to kill, but it is one of the most unforgiving weapons in the SMG category. It's a burst weapon. It does have a basically non-existent burst delay. So you don't even have to click that fast to get close to the maximum fire rate, which is why I do think it is a very viable option, but watching streams and things, basically no one's using it, and I'm not really sure why that is. Maybe it's just there's a learning curve to using it, or maybe it's just so unforgiving that it's not really worth using. So I want to mention that it's one of those guns that if you learn how to use it and you learn how to basically fire very close to the maximum fire rate of the weapon, and it's not hard to do with this one. There's been other weapons in the past that have been much harder, other burst weapons that have been much harder to get close to that maximum fire rate. If you can learn how to do that with the Lachmann Shroud, it will be the best for you, absolutely. But it does have that slower fire rate, and it is burst, so it's very unforgiving. In second place, we have the VEL 46. Basically, the VEL, ISO, and Lachmann sub didn't really change with this new season. The VEL got a little buff to its extremities damage in the first range, and if I remember correctly, the Lachmann sub and the ISO 45 didn't really have any changes at all. So as with the previous patch, Season 5, VEL 46 is a little bit longer range. It's going to have like 4 or 5 extra meters of really good time to kill. With this extremities buff, it might help reduce like 1 shot to kill every now and then, and I do think it is an excellent weapon. A lot of people that play very aggressively don't like it because something like the Lachmann sub or the ISO are going to have a more frequent, faster time to kill, but only by a little bit. So if you mix in a headshot, the VEL 46 is basically going to keep up with both of these, but obviously that's not something that always happens, so you can't rely on that, and that's why most people like the ISO 45 or the Lachmann sub more than the VEL. They're just both more reliable than the VEL in that first 9 meters. But anytime you get a fight between like 9 and 13 meters, which is a lot of fights, that's a very common distance, the VEL is going to be better. So it's one of those things, it's a trade-off. You kind of need to think about how you play the game. Are you really aggressive? Do you get really close to the enemy when you're fighting in those close range engagements? Or do you kind of try to play it a little slower, a little further back? Things like that will be better for the VEL 46 or the ISO. So we'll look at the ISO as well. It has good time to kill out at range compared to the Lachmann. The Lachmann is the most consistent chest shot, headshot, PTK weapon that there is on here besides the Shroud version of it. So the Shroud is going to beat it every day of the week if you can get close to that fire rate like I talked about. But the Lachmann sub is going to be the best in that first range. The ISO 45 is very close in the first range, but then also has more forgiveness anywhere past that. And then the VEL is going to have that nice 9 to 13-ish meters where it excels. In 5th place, we have the Bass P, which is surprising. It's just basically because it has such a long damage range now. It's not really a great aggressive SMG, but for someone who just wants consistency out to 20 meters, if you take longer fights with your SMG, again, if you're kind of a slower player, this is going to be an even slower option than like the VEL or the ISO 45. PDSW is always the movement king. You can see it's tied with the Bass P. So if you like fast movement, this thing is going to be the one you want to pick. It's going to have phenomenal movement speed compared to the other ones. It's just, it's a zoomy boy. All right, I've got the TTK chart up here. We're going to start by looking at what I would consider the more aggressive options, the ones with shorter damage range, but they are still decent at mid-range. But here we go. So we got the Lachmann Shroud in red. This is the burst Lachmann, the new Lachmann suppressed burst version. We have the ISO 45 in blue, and then the regular Lachmann sub, the automatic, in green. So first thing I want to note, first damage range, like I said, if you get relatively close to that fire rate cap of the Lachmann Shroud, which is not hard to hit with this weapon, it has 523 millisecond time to kill. Now, obviously, it has very slow bullet velocity. That's why the lines are so slanted here. The the further you get away from the target, the longer the bullet takes to get there. So because it has slow bullet velocity that is exaggerated as you get out there, it's harder to hit shots, and it just takes the bullet longer to get to the target. You can see that effect here because of the slanted lines. So anything past that first damage range is going to be affected by that pretty significantly. But it's still going to be a lot faster than the Lachmann sub if you hit those shots despite the slow bullet velocity. So that's the first thing. Lachmann Shroud is the time to kill king for sure. Even the DPS. So the DPS on TGD right now is based on, so I put more of like a realistic fire rate than the actual maximum fire rate you could get. So you can see for the Lachmann Shroud here, I have 655 RPM as the RPM of the weapon. When it's calculating TTK, it uses the real shot timings of the weapon, so when the actual bullet is fired and hits. But when it's doing DPS, it can't do that, obviously, because the DPS is not constant. Obviously, during the burst, it's really high, and then there's a little burst delay, so it would go down. So you can't really do that with DPS. So what I do is I take the weapon into the game, and I shoot it myself as fast as I can, and just do it a few tries and see what I get. And I got an average of 655 RPM when I was shooting it myself. So you can see that that was really easy for me to achieve. And even looking at DPS with that in mind, it's still 30 more damage per second than the ISO or the Lachmann sub, the regular one. So even with a little bit of a delay from, me not having perfect bursts, I still had a high enough RPM that it still killed quite a bit faster DPS wise than the ISO 45 or the Lachmann sub. Back over to time to kill here. If we look at the Lachmann sub versus the ISO 45, this is exactly the same as Season 5. Basically, the Lachmann sub is much more forgiving. It will always get this 600 millisecond time to kill in that first range, pretty much. But the ISO 45, if you look blue versus green out here, anywhere past that 8.3 meters, the ISO is just dramatically more forgiving. So there's times where you have your SMG out and, you've got to have a little bit better time to kill out to like 20 meters, 25 meters even sometimes. And you can see that it's like 400 milliseconds faster with the ISO out at 26 meters. And unfortunately, those fights do happen sometimes. They're not as important, so you shouldn't weight them as high because they don't happen nearly as often as anything inside like 15 meters. But I just wanted to mention that anything outside 9 meters, you're going to be better off with the ISO for sure. But the one thing to consider is that the Lachmann sub does have a little bit better recoil than the ISO 45, so that kind of balances out a little bit. But I can tell you from personal experience, from 10 to 20, I would 100% of the time, I would personally rather have the ISO. You can still hit your shots, and the time to kill is dramatically better. So that's kind of the difference. Lachmann Shroud is the ultimate time to kill king if you can deal with that burst. Lachmann sub is number 2. It's going to have the most consistent 600 millisecond chest TTK. And then the ISO 45, based on how the damages line up with different parts of the body, is going to be, number 3 as far as the most consistent up-close weapon in that first damage range. And then past that, ISO 45 is the champion. Lachmann Shroud is going to be really good as well, but it's going to be harder to hit those shots because of the low bullet velocity. All right, I've added the Vel 46 in orange, the Bass P in yellow, Lachmann sub in green, and then PDSW 528 in white on here, just so we can see these more longer range weapons, longer range choices. Right off the bat, the orange Vel here, you can see on combination TTK, it's only 630. It's only 30 milliseconds worse than the Lachmann sub at 600 versus 630 with the Vel. But again, that is a less consistent number. So if you look at how the damages line up with these shot location percentages, the default on TGD, you're going to get these time to kills, but it's going to be less consistent with the Vel that you're going to get 630 because it is assuming that you get like one headshot in that. Whereas the Lachmann sub does not need a headshot to get that 600 milliseconds. So something to consider. That's what this shots to kill tool is here. This will show you how, if you do damage to the chest, how many shots it takes to either increase or reduce that time to kill based on other shot locations. So that's where the power of this tool comes in. I'm not going to go over it in this video because it'll just make it forever, but I did cover it in the Season 5 video if you want to look at that. I explain why the Lachmann sub is more consistent than the ISO 45 in the first damage range in that video. So you're just going to have to trust me on that one in this video. But back to the chart here, you can see the PDSW 528 is sitting at 660 in that first range, but it has tons of damage range, so it gets all the way out to 15 meters with that time to kill. So you're going to destroy anyone with the Lachmann sub anywhere from 8.3 out to 14.7 meters. And then the Bass P in yellow is an even more extreme example of that. Basically, we have the Vel with 13 meters, a little bit slower than the Lachmann sub. Then we have the PDSW, which is a little bit slower than the Vel. And then we have the BAS-P, which is a little bit slower than the PDSW. So they all kind of just extend range, but the TTK gets a little bit worse each time. And they do that on purpose. They're trying to kind of balance these weapons out for different people that play in different ways. But yeah, I think the PDSW is just crazy as far as movement is concerned. It also has really good bullet velocity, so it's a very good weapon, even though the TTK is not absolutely the lowest that it could possibly be. All right, so a summary of all of that. If you want something that is unforgiving, difficult to use, but if you master it and learn how to use it, will beat pretty much everything else in the game, use the Lachmann Shroud. I think the Lachmann Shroud has the potential to be insane right now. In my dedicated Lachmann Shroud video that went up a few days ago, I showed how it has crazy hipfire as well, so you can build it for just insane hipfire for mouse and key players especially. So that's kind of like the number one choice for people who, want something that has the most potential but might be a little harder to learn. If you want something that's just straight up easy to use, I think use the ISO 45 because it has so much more range. It's going to be easy to use everywhere. Throw on a compensator. We'll put that in the build for you, so it helps with recoil. You're just going to win the vast majority of your fights out to 20-25 meters against other SMGs. And then if you're looking for something with more movement and a little bit more damage range, the VEL 46 and the PDSW 528 I think are going to be your two choices. I love the PDSW because it's P90 and I love Stargate, and that's what they always used in Stargate, so I have a special spot for that in my heart. If I ever make a game, P90 is going to be meta the whole time, so we'll see about that. But BAS-P, I wouldn't really recommend that. TTK is just too bad. It has so much damage range. It might be a really good sniper support, but I just don't think it's going to be a good, regular old SMG. All right, getting into builds here. So this is the Lachmann Shroud, fastest time to kill. I do want to remind you guys, if you like the content that I make, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, drop a like on the video, drop a comment down below. Work pretty crazy hard on True Game Data and the YouTube videos, so I appreciate that. But let's jump back into it. Lachmann Shroud here, we've got the VLK 7mm laser, FT mobile stock, Lachmann TCG10 rear grip, and 50 round drum mag. And then, so we got an open slot here if you're going to use iron sights. And I think that the best is probably one of these ammunitions. So you could do any one of these really. You have to just kind of decide what you want. Hollow point tends to be really good. It delays when the enemy heals after taking damage. And it can take up to like 12 or 13 seconds if you hit them with this. So that's probably the one I would most likely recommend. But let's get through the tunings here. So VLK 7mW, we've got minus 0.19 towards sprint to fire, minus 19.74 towards aim down sight speed. For the mobile stock, we have minus 1.86 inches towards aim to walking speed, minus 3.48 ounces towards aim down sight speed. Rear grip, minus 0.38 inches towards sprint to fire speed, minus 0.26 ounces towards aim down sight speed. And then I'll have to tune this one for you guys here. So recoil steadiness versus bullet velocity. We're going to go bullet velocity because this thing has such low bullet velocity to start with. We're going to go all the way to the side, so all the way to the right. Damage range, recoil smoothness, we're going to go damage range. We want to extend that out as much as possible. Again, it has really short damage range, so any little benefit is going to be nice. It's all kind of the same in here. It looks like it gets a little longer, so we're going to go all the way to the top on damage range. This thing, I think, is... If I was playing this game more than I am right now, this is what I would be using, because I think that it's really easy to hit that fire rate cap. It has basically no recoil, so you can beam targets at longer ranges. It has great hip fire, great ADS time. It's just a really, really good weapon, and I don't really know why no one's using it, because to me it doesn't feel super unforgiving. I understand that it is more unforgiving than like the ISO or the sub, but for me this is what I'd be using 100% if I was playing the game more. On the ISO here, this is a little bit different than I recommended last season, but it's pretty much the same. So we got the spiral flash hider. This is kind of like a middle ground between ADS and recoil control. The ISO has worse recoil than the Lachmann sub and terrible iron sights. So unfortunately, we kind of lose a couple attachments to that, but the ISO is so good in its base form that I'm not too worried about that. And the attachments on the Lachmann Shroud and sub, both, I mean, there's not really a bunch of attachments that help it a ton anyway, so I don't think it's that big of a negative here. So the idea behind this is we got the spiral flashlighter to help with recoil, and then quickfire laser, demo fade tac for better mobility in ADS, and then an optic because the iron sights are terrible. So tuning for the flash hider, minus 0.26 towards aim down sight speed, plus 0.22 towards gun kick control. For the 1mW quickfire laser, I use this one instead of the VLK because I like to ADS walk with this weapon. With this stock, we have great ADS movement speed. So having a laser that's not visible while you're doing that is a really big benefit. So no one knows you're coming. You're not making footstep noises. I just like the combo of good ADS movement and no visible laser. So we're all the way towards sprint to fire on the vertical, and then minus 27.97 towards aim down sight speed on the horizontal for the laser. Optic, you can tune this how you want. I tend to go ADS speed on SMGs. Flinch is really bad for long range weapons, but in close range engagements, I think sometimes flinch can actually make you get some headshots you weren't expecting to get. So we're going to leave flinch resistance alone. And this already has not amazing ADS time, which is why we went with the flash hider instead of like the Bruin pendulum or something that helps with recoil even more, because we didn't want to hurt that ADS. So we're going to tune towards ADS here. Close versus far, personal preference there again. Close is going to be, better sight picture of your target. So that's good for like mouse and key players. And then far, going to have less visual recoil. Again, that's a good thing for mouse and key players. But either way, you can tune what you want there. They're both okay. For the stock, we have minus 2.19 ounces towards aim down sight speed, and then minus 1.16 inches towards aim walking speed. And then take this into the firing range. You can see it's going to have really, really good ADS movement speed. Like, that's really fast ADS movement speed, and you can't see that laser when you're an enemy. You can see it a little bit when you're the person using the weapon, the blue laser, but the enemies can't see that in the air. So this is still very accurate, even only with that flash hider. ADS time is pretty good. It's not amazing, but this is my personal second favorite SMG. I prefer this over the Lachmann sub just for that extra range, because the way I play, I feel like I have a lot of engagements that are longer than 9 meters, which is where the cutoff is for that Lachmann sub. So that's why I like this a lot. Very consistent and does very well in those mid-range engagements. All right, on to the Lachmann sub. This is probably the more aggressive player who doesn't want something that's inconsistent like the Lachmann Shroud. This is probably their preferred weapon here. So this is the build that I'm going with for this season. So we've got the barrel. This is the L38 Falcon. This is going to help with movement speed and ADS speed. It's going to hurt your bullet velocity and recoil control, but those are two things that we don't care so much about. Bullet velocity. It's still going to be faster than the Lachmann Shroud, and the recoil on this weapon is phenomenal, so we don't really need to worry about that too much. We've got the VLK 7 milliwatt, the FT mobile stock, 9mm frangible, and 50 round drum. For the previous two builds, I think I said it wrong. I said hollow point was the one that delays healing. Hollow point's the one that delays your movement, disables their sprint for a little bit. Frangible is the one that delays their healing. So frangible is the one that I would personally go with right now. I'll throw some text corrections in for the other ones, but so on the ISO build, I said I like to mix the non-visible lasers with really good ADS movement speed, and that is true. But the ADS time on the MP5 is a little bit worse. That's why I have the 7 milliwatt. It helps more with ADS time than the quickfire does. But again, that's personal preference. If you want to throw the quickfire on there instead of this because you like to ADS walk around a lot and you can be silent and have no laser showing, that is also a fantastic option. The mobile stock got buffed in Season 5 Reloaded for the Lachmann Shroud and Lachmann Sub, so it actually helps with ADS movement a lot more than it did before. And then frangible, like we said, delays their healing. So this is a pretty nice build. It's going to be really quick. Recoil is going to be manageable, pretty good ADS time. Let's go through the tunings. So for the Falcon, we have all the way towards aim walking speed and then plus 0.23 towards damage range. The 7 milliwatt laser, minus 0.18 ounces towards sprint to fire speed and minus 26.32 towards aim down sight speed. For the mobile stock, we have all the way towards aim down sight speed and then minus 2.01 inches towards aimed walking speed. For frangible, plus 0.54 towards damage range and plus 8.13 grain towards bullet velocity. So if we take this into the firing range, it's going to have very good ADS movement speed as well. It feels about the same as the ISO as far as ADS movement speed. ADS time feels pretty comparable as well. Accuracy, like I said, it's very, very accurate. I would say compared to the previous ISO build, it feels a little bit less accurate at mid-range, just because the barrel on this hurts that recoil, and the ISO had the spiral flash hider just to help with it. So this is a great build. This is going to be the most consistent time to kill in that first damage range, if that's what you're looking for. On to the Vel 46, this is going to be a mid-range demon. This is going to be pretty much everything in that 9 to 14 meter range. It's going to be really, really good there, and that's a very common engagement distance. So we got the quickfire laser, demo RXT stock, Schlager soldier grip, 60 round mag, and frangible ammunition. There are other good attachments for this weapon. You can just check out MetaGen, see what it thinks are the best. This is the top build on MetaGen here. So tunings, quickfire laser all the way towards sprint to fire, and then minus 41.13 towards aim down sight speed. Demo RXT, we've got minus 1.81 towards aim down sight speed and minus 1.86 towards aimed walking speed. For the rear grip, minus 0.39 ounces towards aim down sight, minus 0.3 towards sprint to fire. And then for the frangible ammunition, plus 7.55 grain towards bullet velocity, and plus 0.63 grams towards damage range. So if we take this into the firing range, this also will have good ADS movement speed. Feels a little slower than the other two, the ISO and the Lachmann sub. But like I said, it has really good damage range. So the mid range is going to be really good here. I don't actually love the iron sights on this, unfortunately. The rear sight posts kind of just get in your way as you're strafing around compared to a lot of the other weapons. So if that bothers you, if I was going to drop one of these attachments, I would probably drop frangible ammunition if it were me. So I would drop that, put on an optic, and that's going to make it feel much, much more accurate and easy to see your target in most situations. Like, that's just so much better. It's just so much better than having the iron sights there. So personal preference, if you're a controller player, you're probably going to lean towards iron sights. Mouse and key player might lean towards having the optic. All right, last up we have the P90 here. So this is just the maximum mobility sort of build. We have the quickfire laser, hollow extended stock, TV tack comb, and then the Bruin Q900 rear grip with the GR33 light rail. So because this comes with the built-in 50 round mag, we don't have to have a magazine slot, which is nice. Gives us one extra attachment to work with. The iron sights on this weapon, I would say, are pretty terrible. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend using this unless you're someone who really is fine with not being able to see your target. So what I would do is I would run either the integrated reflex rail instead. So let's take a look at these real fast. Hop into the firing range. So this is the light rail iron sights. It's really hard to see where you're aiming, especially anything mid-range. So I wouldn't recommend that for really anyone. Integrated reflex rail here is going to be better. So it has a integrated reflex. It's not great. It's a small sight picture, but it's still miles better than the iron sights. So a good idea probably would be to run the light rail and then maybe take off the quickfire laser and throw on a Slimline Pro. So now you're going to have the movement speed of the light rail, but you're going to have an optic. And this is just night and day difference. This is so much better. It's a very accurate weapon. Really phenomenal movement speeds with this build. So let's go through tunings. So aim down sight speed for the optic, we're going to go right there. So minus 2.2 ounces. And then close versus far, personal preference like always. I'd probably go close on this weapon. Extended stock, the hollow extended stock, plus 1.86 ounces towards aimed walking steadiness, minus 0.46 inches towards aimed walking speed. TV tack comb, we got minus 0.34 ounces towards aimed walking speed, minus 0.13 inches towards aim down sight speed. For the Q900 rear grip, we have minus 0.42 towards aim down sight speed and minus 0.29 towards sprint to fire speed. And then for the light rail, we're going to do sprint to fire speed, minus 0.16 inches right there, and then sprint speed. So sprint speed is going to be all the way at the end, minus 0.5 pounds. So this is a pretty competitive build, really. It's a very good weapon. It's got great mobility, great movement, good range. It's just going to lose to the Lachmann Shroud, Lachmann Sub, and ISO 45 in that first 8 to 9 meter range, which is an extremely important range if you're an aggressive player. So that's kind of the trade-off. They did mention Season 5 Reloaded in the patch notes that the PDSW actually had the highest TTK, the best kill to death ratio of any weapon among high skilled players. Now, I don't know if that's a correlation doesn't mean causation thing, but it's something to keep in mind. Like, it could just be that certain people really liked this weapon and played a certain way with it, and that's why it came out with the high KD, or maybe only better players ended up using it, so that kicked its KD up. So something to keep in mind. I don't think you should put too much stock in that, but just wanted to mention that. I think it's a very good gun. All right, everybody, that's it for the video. As always, the best way to support is just a True Game Data Premium subscription. $5 a month, you get access to all the features, my YouTube videos 2 days earlier, MetaGen, advanced recoil plots, this new accuracy, true TTK tool that I talked about in my long range video. If you haven't seen that, you should check that out. I posted that a couple days ago. But yeah, that's the best way to support. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like the YouTube videos, like the video, comment on the video, and I will see you guys all in the next one.